What if I told you that today there are people serving life sentences for simply publishing information, exposing the government, and finding loopholes around the controlling system? It is the same pattern throughout human history. A group of people or government obtains a certain amount of power and unknowingly abuse it at the detriment of the people. And one thing that government or that group of people in power don't like is when they're exposed. And that's happened more times than you would think, especially within the US government. Everyone differentiates on where they believe the line of freedom should be drawn. Some believe they should be given more, and some believe they should be given less. In this case, a man by the name of Ross Ulbricht created a dark web called Silk Road in 2011. He simply created a web browser that was accessible to anyone across the world to purchase items or purchase any product of their choosing on this self-autonomous dark web browser. Now, many of the people that would be on the side of giving more freedom would say this is part of the free market. And what Ross did, the ideology behind his website, Silk Road, was not fully legal. As I said, any free market, libertarian-minded person would be accepting of this. They would say you're allowed to transact and purchase goods in whatever way you choose. And if it's unsafe, then that's on you. It's simply allowing the choice of autonomy, the choice of freedom. And many oppose of this. And that's where the government intervenes in Ross Ulbricht's Silk Road situation. In the late 2000s, after the iPhone and the internet really took off, Ross had the idea that he could sell products and essentially drugs, mushrooms and marijuana through the internet autonomously on this browser. He was able to provide others a service that the government couldn't give them due to these various substances being illegal. So he did this after the boom of the internet, after Bitcoin, after things really did take off with the internet and the acceptance of it. So he saw this opportunity, this window that he could give people what they wanted, peer-to-peer, completely autonomous, without having government intervention, as well as using Bitcoin and various cryptocurrencies as payments to secure the transaction from one end to the other. Now, it's not necessarily that Ross exposed the government for doing anything, but it's rather he was able to find an alternative system to beat what they already had, or rather compete with what they had, because it was more open source, open to freedom, and allowed more autonomy than what the government could allow you to do. So that was very enticing for people who wanted to transact anonymously. And as this website started to grow over time, it started to get attention from the FBI and several law enforcement agencies that kept getting reports through anonymous tips, drug seizures, and undercover operations. They were able to find that Ross was located in California, operating the dark web under the name of Silk Road. They pinned it to him through a simple email that was found on the internet. It wasn't like this guy was a mastermind criminal. He actually had very good intentions, and he was actually worth around $100 million at the time. I believe he would be one of the richest men in the world had they not seized his Bitcoin. I mean, it was absolutely insane what they took from him. But when you think of Ross here and you actually understand the guy, he didn't intend to harm anyone, and he actually wasn't guilty of harming anyone. The issue the government had is where everyone else was transacting on his app. Everyone else was doing all this, so therefore he's guilty of every single thing done on that app. And when you allow open source and autonomy throughout cyberspace and the internet, like we see on X, you're going to see some precarious and abnormal things take place. And transitioning to the free market where things are sold, well, you're going to see some very abnormal and unexpected things sold throughout that marketplace and an autonomous open source network like Silk Road. So where the feds really felt inclined to step in was obviously through the drug seizures. And also it got really intense because there were some people that were offering murder for hire on there. So very illegal things were taking place on this web, but in a sense, there are many illegal things that do take place within the United States government. It's not necessarily that they're worried about being able to harm yourself by making the mistake of purchasing this. They want to take that power away from you. They want to have the control to stop someone like Ross Ulbricht from being able to operate an open source system where the government will not profit from taxes and has no say in what's sold on that marketplace. Like I said, Ross did not partake in any of these criminal actions, nor was he charged for them. He was only charged for what everybody else did on his app. He was accountable for every single thing that happened. He was charged with 2 life sentences with no chance of parole and currently rots away in a prison cell in the United States. Many have petitioned to free Ross Ulbricht, and he even has a Twitter account run by relatives that has amassed to almost 200,000 followers. Politicians like Vivek Ramaswamy has even spoken about pardoning Ross Ulbricht.
Certainly by October of this year, over 10 years in prison. I think it is an unfair standard that we use for him for running a platform.
His sentencing should be deemed as cruel and unusual punishment. That much time for someone that physically did not partake in any criminalities, he just was accountable for everything he created on the web. What they're saying is they want to discourage people to have open minds and create their own autonomous websites that they can exclude the government from. They use Ross Ulbricht as an example to everyone with a free mind and open ideas on the internet. And they seized all of his Bitcoin, they took all of his wealth that would have made him a billionaire, potentially one of the richest in the world. I do believe Ross should be accountable for the things that happened on there, but I think the punishment was absolutely cruel and severe. He should probably face fines, but jail time I think is really questionable. Ross drew the line several times with certain things. He wouldn't allow body parts, he wouldn't allow the sale of guns. He actually drew a line when it came to being the gatekeeper of his network. So it wasn't like he was an evil villain that encouraged chaos and encouraged violence and all these terroristic things that the government makes him out to be. He was just a regular guy that had an open mind and wanted to reach people throughout the internet. It turned out to be very popular. Silk Road was accepted by millions of people before the government decided to shut it down. Today, Bitcoin is worth $46,000, and at the time it was only worth hundreds and thousands. And it just shows where that autonomy, where that freedom is today. People are still enticed by it and it hasn't gone anywhere. And that's why many, including myself, have petitioned and spoken up to get Ross Ulbricht a presidential pardon. Now, someone who did expose the government was a journalist by the name of Julian Assange. Julian currently resides in one of the most high maximum security prisons in London with some of the most dangerous and fictitious murderers out there. All he did was simply expose the government on his site called WikiLeaks. Julian Assange embarrassed the US government on numerous occasions, including an illegal drone strike on Iraq citizens by the United States that was deemed false at first after the video was released, but then Julian Assange was able to debunk it for being true.
More that keep walking by and one of them has a weapon.
Roger, receive.
See all those people standing down there?
Oh, yeah. That's a weapon.
Yeah. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
I'll bet
We got an RPG.
All right, we got a guy with an RPG.
Having a fire? We got a guy shooting. Now he's behind the building. Come on, fire.
Hey, Roger. Keep shooting. Keep shooting. All right, we just engaged.
So the US literally killed innocent civilians in Iraq, and they lied about it, and therefore he exposed it, making them, they got caught red-handed. They looked dumb, they lied. It destroys their credibility and their reputation amongst the people if somebody else can counter their narrative that they put out there, which Assange did. So then you fast forward to 2016. Hillary Clinton beats Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary elections. She goes on to lose against Donald Trump. Julian Assange was able to prove that Hillary Clinton rigged the Democratic primary election against Bernie Sanders. This sent a shocking wave throughout the internet, and he was able to prove the United States' involvement. The United States charged Assange on the century-old Espionage Act, asserting that he was a traitor by leaking national and vital information throughout the country that was supposed to be protected, but that information exposed them for lying. But the humble servants of power, the mainstream media, they crucified him. Just as they're doing to Donald Trump today, they did to Julian Assange. He's currently waiting extradition to the United States on those charges, but it appears that they have no interest in doing so. He currently resides in London in complete lockdown, and they're just hoping that Assange will just die in prison and they'll just torture him to death. They have no interest in trying him because they don't want him to be free-spoken. They don't want him to expose any more of what the government's already done. They know he's an expert. They know he's very skilled. And their way of silencing him is not only doing so, but it's sending a message to anyone else out there who has interest in exposing government lies and corruption that they've endured on the people. You see the consequences here. And Julian Assange is one person I believe that will be pardoned within the next 5 years. It will take the right person in power, whether that's Donald Trump or the likings of Vivek Ramaswamy. Needs someone in the United States to rightfully pardon Julian Assange. He is someone that did not do anything, but yet he's facing harsher sentences in an environment than some of these rapists and murderers out there. It's absolutely absurd that he's even there to begin with. But that's what happens when you expose the government. That's what happens when you embarrass the CIA. So then you have someone that exposed the United States that's not currently incarcerated, but if he was in the country today or one that could extradite him to the United States, he certainly would be. And that's Edward Snowden. So Snowden worked for the NSA, which was responsible for finding terroristic and harmful deemed threats against the United States via surveillance and technology. So what Snowden realized in his career is at first he wanted to find these evil terrorists after 9/11, after the country is in this new surveillance state. So he saw that they were doing this with good intentions at first. Then Snowden realized that they were abusing this power. They were simply watching people in their homes. They were watching people undress. He saw that they were unethically using this against people, and they weren't even making this public. Nobody knew this at the time. He worked a very boring desk job, but he had access to all this information that he would then relay to very important and powerful people throughout the government. He took this information on a hard drive, saved it to that, and then leaked it to these journalists, therefore exposing this information to the entire world. This information was salient to keep secret by the government because they did not want people to know that they were secretly spying on them and not the terrorists all throughout the world that tried to harm America. So the government did not want people to know this. Once this information reached the public, the US government instantly deemed Snowden as a traitor and charged him with the same thing they charged Julian Assange with, which was the Espionage Act. He was able to elude US law enforcement by fleeing to Russia, where he is not able to be extradited to this day. So that was a big revelation when it came to the people in trust with the government. It was the first time that we saw in the digital era that there was mass surveillance being used against the people. That's what Snowden exposed the government for lying about and was able to tell the public what was actually happening. They're going to try to paint him as one of the most vile traitors in US history. And so do the mainstream outlets. They try to persuade the public that Snowden was some Russian spy that was a traitor to America and not actually examining the information that he had leaked. It was the fact that, oh, he leaked this, but it exposed us lying. So that's how these tyrants work. You expose them, they come after you. So Snowden, like I said, he resides in Russia. He's actually a citizen there and cannot be extradited back to the United States. I'm sure they would very much love to prosecute him and put him up against a wall in a heartbeat. I do believe Edward Snowden was acting out of self-righteous behavior. I think he had the intention of helping people understand this, and he did. He gets the criticism and criminal-like deemed behavior simply by allowing other countries to know that the U.S. was spying on its own citizens. The last issue of pardons I would give out is to not one individual person, but a group of people. And that is the peaceful January 6th protesters. Every single person that was there on Capitol Hill that day that did not harm someone that was peacefully protesting deserves to be presidentially pardoned and have their crimes wiped off their record. To keep the police and the government accountable for this being an inside job on January 6th. The U.S. government needs to be held accountable, and until they are, every single person should be pardoned and should not be criminally pursued. So between Ross Ulbricht, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and the January 6th peaceful protesters, they should all receive presidential pardons immediately, and I'm calling on the Biden administration to do so before they leave office, because this is unlawful, it's unjust, and these people are being persecuted just for exposing the lies that your administration and previous administrations have tried to perpetuate to the American public that you should be accountable for.